go with the first question after that. So you can do first question for opening remarks, CJ, and then Kevin after that.
Thank y'all so much. Can you hear me okay, or?
Is that mic on there?
Can y'all hear me? Everybody?
We can hear you.
We can hear you, but you can hear before. Okay, can y'all hear me now?
I don't know if that mic is on. It's usually push it forward, right there.
Probably user error.
Yeah, it's on now.
Oh,
That's on.
now can you hear me? All right. Thank y'all. So first, serving as a trustee, I served the district for over 6 years in campus-wide and district-wide, and then even some county-wide positions for over 6 years before I ran 4 years ago. 4 years ago, I ran focusing on continuing the good things that are happening in Fort Worth ISD and working to better where, like, let's say where the water needs to rise. And really, after honing in on the problems the last 4 years, where the water needs to rise is our elementary reading levels. And so I am hyper-focused on that. That is the first of my 3 goals and focuses. The second has been fiscal transparency and responsibility. And the third has been parental engagement. And so I stand here, or sit here with you tonight to talk about my experience the last 4 years in these issues. Despite it being the most tumultuous time in public education, I feel like my experience speaks for itself, and I'm the best one for this position, and I'm asking for all District 5 voters for your vote.
All right, thank you. And your opening remarks, Kevin?
Thanks, appreciate everyone being here. My name is Kevin Lynch, running for School Board District 5. For those of you that haven't met me or had a chance to speak with me, got 5 kids all in District 5. Been involved in a lot of different ways within the school district, whether that's PTA, sitting on site-based decision-making committees, citizen oversight committee, Fort Worth ISD-wide council PTAs, and a lot of other capacities. I got involved and see some things that need to change within Fort Worth ISD, and that's ultimately what led me to run. The 3 things I'm running on is academic excellence and making sure that all kids within Fort Worth ISD are doing things that we're set out to do, which is educate these kids, fiscal responsibility and transparency to the taxpayers, and last, building stronger communities around these schools. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Well, let's jump right into the first question. We'll let you go first on this one, CJ. Just elaborate on both your opening remarks. How do you see your stances on the key issues do or don't differ from your opponent? And then based on that, why should voters return you to office rather than your opponent?
Thank you for the question. For many people that I've talked to over the last several months, I've let you know that Kevin reached out to me last fall and we had coffee, and I really respected that, and I thanked him for that. And he told me he wanted to run for school board, and I asked him why. And he essentially kind of repeated my platform back to me, as you kind of just heard. And I asked him how he was going to do it differently or better, and he didn't have an answer for that. And here we sit 7.5 months later, and I still haven't heard an answer for that. My opponent is the nicest guy in Fort Worth, but please don't vote for him because he is nice. Please vote for the person who is most qualified for the seat. I have, like I said, a proven track record in these things. He talks about fiscal transparency because of my advocacy on the board the last 4 years. We're in the process of switching to a zero-based budget. I'm doing the work. He's talking about the work. He's talking about very good things and things that we need to continue to focus on. And I will continue to focus on these if reelected. But that is the main difference. Also, another difference is the depth of experience in Fort Worth ISD prior to running. Like I pointed out, I served for 6 years in a volunteer capacity, district-wide. I could name a long list like he just did of district-wide and county-wide committees. And I served until there was an open seat. I wasn't trying to oust an incumbent doing what I was proposing to do.
All right, thank you. Kevin, basically the same question for you. How platform differs and why voters should vote for you rather than an incumbent.
I think the biggest thing that we have to take care of is, academic excellence. What I'll say is proof's in the pudding. Actions speak louder than words. And, if we look at the polls, first round, I got 46% of the vote. And now we're in a runoff situation. And so if what we're saying is getting done and everybody's happy with where things are and our reading levels in schools are where they need to be, then, full steam ahead. But I think, what I've seen over 6 months, and a little bit longer talking to people is that the change is needed and we need to focus on elementary education and we need to take the resources and, we need to continue to invest and make sure that these kids can read on grade level. We continue to put kids beyond that. I mentor a couple kids within the district that are, in 5th grade, 4th grade, one of them can't read and continue to push them along, and it breaks my heart. And it's one of those things for me that if we don't put the resources in, K through 3rd grade and even before in pre-K and even looking beyond that, we're going to continue to put kids in a position where they can't succeed. The other thing I'll talk about is we're in budget session right now. We're proposing a $50 million deficit on the new budget. We have a board that doesn't have expertise from a CPA standpoint. We haven't created any type of citizen committee to take a look at things and really look at how we're doing them similar to districts, how we're doing them better. We haven't done an audit on our budget, and there's a lot of things that need to continue to happen. And so there are things that need to change. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. CJ, up to Matt for rebuttal, if you so choose.
Yes, thank you. I would like to point out that the budget that is being discussed in a $50 million deficit is not what is being proposed. It's less than that. That's not an accurate reflection. I would also like to point out that in the 4 years that I've been on the board, we've ended in the black, not the red. I am fiscally responsible, but sometimes, given certain things, budget cycles do get off. As we transition to a zero-based budget, deficit spending will be eliminated or decreased. So I wanted to point out that discrepancy. Secondly, Worth ISD is a large district with complex issues that does not turn on a dime. Our academics are improving. Since the last 4 years I've been on the board, we've gone from a D district to a B district. That's based on our reading levels. We still have miles to go before we can become an A+ district, but we can get there. But it is happening, but it does not happen overnight, but it is happening, and I'm the best one and most qualified for this seat this year, this term.
Kevin, anything else you'd like to add to that before we go on to the next question?
Yeah, no, I'll just say, I'm going to treat this money within this district like it's my own. If we don't have the money, we're not going to spend the money. I think that's something that's paramount in the way we take at these things, and when we choose to spend the money, there needs to be research behind what we're spending and not spend money because it's put forth. If there's not research behind that this is going to have improved results for kids where it's been done in other places, then we shouldn't do it.
Well, let's go to the next question. Another challenge the district faces is declining enrollment. Kevin, I'll let you field this question first. It's clear, and the superintendent said as much, that with declining enrollment, the district is going to have to close many schools in the next few years. How will you let the community know which schools are most likely to be closed and involve the community in that process? I think the biggest thing that we have to have is transparency. Hard decisions are going to have to be made, and our job as a board or school district is to put the best product out there. And when things aren't as good as they should be, people have a choice, and people have chosen to walk with their tax dollars in certain instances and their feet and take their kids to homeschool, some private schools, some charter schools. And so with that, I think we need to be transparent. If we're telling people that schools are going to close, we need to engage the community, but also let them know what our decisions are. And before we make those decisions, the biggest thing is we got to actually have a plan. What I've seen and being engaged on things is decisions are made and money is spent and approved without having a master plan of how we're doing it. And so there needs to be a master plan moving forward, and we need to be transparent with the community. CJ, same question, slightly different though, because you're in office. So I guess the question would be, how well do you think the community's been informed so far about this process? And how will you make sure they're even more informed? Because some of the feedback we've gotten is that people are concerned. They wanna know what schools. Do you know what schools? Can you tell us?
No, I do not know what schools. So, I agree with my opponent on the importance of transparency and communication, in this process. Fort Worth ISD as a district is, really trying to be much more proactive with key, communications such as this. You hit the nail on the head, the enrollment's declining, we all know this. This is a problem for all large urbans across the country. It's not just Fort Worth ISD's problem. As a trustee, I say that, I am tasked with educating our children and overseeing that. And so when we are an A+ district, when every neighborhood has an A school in it and a neighborhood school, we're gonna stop declining in enrollment. So the continuation of transparency and communication and every step of the
If you were in office, how do you think special interests factor into this race, and what should voters know about that?
Well, that's a great question. I do ask myself, and when I talk with voters, I ask them, is my opponent this far in the race standing on his own, or because he's backed by historical political figures in this town? Is he this far in the election because he's the most qualified, or because he's just a nice guy? So the special interest question is very important, and everyone has to answer that. In terms of, if you're talking about vendors or our procurement process,
It could be that.
okay, we have a procurement process in place. I am open to re-examining that policy and process if it needs to be tightened. But we have a procurement process in place where the staff chooses the best one through this process and formula, and then presents to the board. So there is no conflict of interest. We do have a policy saying that trustees can only accept certain amounts from vendors. Ours is actually on par with other municipalities in North Texas. We don't have any large amount that we can accept compared to others. So our ethics policy in that regard is on par. And our procurement process and policy is a valid, solid one, but as trustee, I could, again, see a reviewing of it or tightening of it, of any policy process or procedure to make the institution run more efficiently.
Kevin, same question, but a little different for you, but the same question. How do you think special interests factor into this race, and what should voters know about that, if anything?
Yeah, I think, this is something for me. I'm not a politician. I'm running for school board to make a difference for kids. The people that know me and the people that showed up to the polls know that about me. Anyone that has donated in my campaign, I let them know who I am, what I stand for, what I'm about, and nobody contributing to my campaign is going to change how I'm going to make decisions. I've been very clear with that with anybody. The people that have donated in my campaign, and it's public information for everybody, that's out there, and I'm here to make a difference for all kids in this district.
So CJ, a chance to add to that?
Yes, thank you. I want to go back to what I opened with, and that is my experience. I want you to look at my last 4 years on this board and see that I have always focused on what's best for kids. And I have voted and everything I've done from the dais and voted on from the dais has been without fear or favor. And I have done it for the kids first and foremost, and the taxpayers come in a close second. As most of you know, I voted against the bond because I didn't think it was the right thing to do for the taxpayers. Talk about perceived special interest, I'm voting against a big conglomerate in that regard, and it was the right thing to do for the taxpayer, and that's what I did.
Kevin, anything to add to that?
I'm good.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit more about perceived conflicts of interest. And this one for Kevin, are there, looking at district policies or procedures, are there any that you would think should be changed to curtail the perceived or real conflict of interest in the board, with vendors, with staff? If you go, and the context for that question is, you go back 20 years with the school district, there have been cases where there have been problems. So what do you think the policies are working now, or what should be changed?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the big thing with anything, you know, as you look at things as they're proposed for approvals, certain information needs to be clear and concise. When you look at, you know, things that are hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars presented at the board agenda meetings, there's not a lot of information given other than it sounds good on paper. As a board, I think it's our, you know, duty to make sure that, you know, who the vendors are, you know, how they're connected in any way to the district, you know, what other vendors we've looked at, why we chose this one. All that information needs to be provided when we're looking at things, and then the research behind why we're choosing this. Is it support that this is better for the kids, or why are we doing these things? And if those things aren't there, then those things shouldn't be approved. One of the things I haven't seen with the board is we continue to say no until we're given the information to feel good about saying yes, and that's something that I would change.
Well, and same question for CJ about what policies will you work to change, and additionally, because you've been in office, what have you done in your first 4 years to reduce these conflicts of interest?
Well, no specific policy number or, you know, comes to mind, and I'm sorry I don't have all those kind of tucked away in my encyclopedia. But to his point, anytime I do ask any of that information, it is provided to me. So he's here proposing to work on and do what is already being done, okay? So if there is any contract, any question with any vendor, anything, all the information that he just talked about needing is provided upon request. So he's not gonna jump in and make the process different or better because it's already being done that way. Also to that point, I do say no to things. I don't know if any of you watched the last board meeting, but I voted against a curriculum that got praise from a lot of teachers because I didn't have some questions that were answered the right way that I felt like I needed. And so I did vote no. That got passed. And as you know, everything has to pass or fail by a vote of 5 or more. And so that was one issue that I actually, my vote failed. It was a 6-3 vote. But we do push back. So to that point, would he have been able to suddenly garner 2 extra votes in that moment to block the initiative? I don't think so. So it is being done, and the process works with that accountability, with the trustees, and that continuity of accountability, with the trustees providing continual accountability on these issues and in a consistent, measured approach, which is what I've done in the last 4 years.
Do you have anything you'd like to add to that? All right, well, the next question, we'll start with CJ. As both of you referenced, the top concern that most have identified at the school district is the low percentage of students reading at grade level, particularly at the critical 3rd grade level. What more can the school board do to help the district achieve academic excellence?
Resource allocation is a huge and key piece. Some of the ways that we have, I think, better allocated resources to address our literacy issues in the last 4 years since I've been on the board is through Saturday school. We have Saturday school in our lower performing campuses for our kids who just need a few extra hours of reading. We also have strong, robust summer program, also at my urging and insistence, and at my advocacy for those resources being deployed in that manner. We also have taken efforts to align our pyramids. That was something that was done under the last administration, but it took board agreement and messaging, and that is something in aligning the pyramids, it's actually enhanced our family engagement. And I think, of course, with every family that has a student, they should be involved to the utmost of that student's education. And so when they are, that student's reading level, math level, etc., rises. So those are all efforts that I have led as trustee, and so it goes to policy, advocacy, and then of course resource allocation. And it does cost more sometimes to educate students with a lower teacher to student ratio. But students who aren't reading on grade level may need a lower teacher to student ratio. And so, but I am committed to that continual resource allocation to meet the most important needs, and that is our elementary reading levels.
All right. Kevin, same question. What more can the school board do to help the district achieve academic excellence?
I think that one of the things I mentioned first is letting parents know where their kids stand. Board meetings, we tend to put information up there saying our district went from a D to a B, or we change, what we're presenting. The information needs to be consistent, and we need to let parents know where they stand. Let them know, can they read on grade level, or not? And I think the first thing you do is send a letter home to every parent and let them know where their actual children stand. If they're coming home with A's, we just had the last day of school. A lot of parents think their kids are where they need to be going on to the next grade, and then they get there and they're in 4th grade and they can't read and they can't do what they need to do, and then they become a distraction, and it kind of, takes care of itself. So for me, the first thing is sending that note home. The other thing is we have to take a strong investment of kids from 3rd all the way through pre-K, and even look at potentially before. If we don't get these kids reading, they continue to be distractions, and the data suggests that if they're not reading after that, there's a 5% success rate. And so the resources need to be put there. What I have seen is we talk about needing to do these things, but we haven't had a strategic plan in place that if we do these things in these schools, that these are the things that are going to get us where we need to go.
Thank you. CJ, anything you want to add to that?
Yes, I do, thank you. We do have that plan. It's called a campus improvement plan, and every campus that is not meeting its goal has one, and it specifically lays out the steps for that. I couldn't agree with my opponent more about early childhood, that we invest and allocate resources is important. In this current bond, 2 of our elementary schools are slated to have enhanced early childhood areas. Super excited about that, and on other ongoing efforts throughout the community, not just in Worth ISD buildings. In terms of letting parents know where they stand in communication, I'm really glad you brought that up, because you brought it up in several forums and I've never had a chance to respond. One of my children, I have 4 in the district, one of them is dyslexic. And guess what? We knew by the end of 1st grade he wasn't on par. They're not quite reading on 1st grade, or there may be some, but he still was, going along with the flow and doing just fine. But at the end of 1st grade, we got a letter, and then we got consistent communication all the way up to his diagnosis. So that is happening already. It just may not have happened to his kids, but it had happened to mine personally. I'm speaking here as a parent. So Worth ISD did a great job in communicating that my child wasn't on track, so we got him on track before the end of elementary school.
Kevin, would you like to add to that? All right. So our final question before closing remarks is we'll go with Kevin first. The big challenge for the district has, along with academic excellence, is cutting costs, right? At the same time, that's the position the district is in. The superintendent already has started this process with an administrative restructuring. What do you think of what she's proposed so far, and where else can the district reduce expenses to reach a balanced budget?
I think there's a couple things. Yes, some changes have been made, and new people have been brought in certain places. One of the things that I would argue is that looking at what was versus what is hasn't directly been communicated. So we don't know what we're looking at as far as implementation goes. Are we spending more money on administration? Are we spending less? How is it going to be better? How is it going to be worse? And so from my standpoint, sitting where I do today, the communication hasn't been there to how it's going to look different. The other thing I can say is, sitting on the Citizen Oversight Committee, is there's not a master plan in place with how we're doing things. It's something I've stressed and talked, had a chance to sit down with the superintendent and share my opinion with those things. If we've got taxpayers' money and we're spending a lot of money, we need to make sure that there's a plan in place of where that money's going and why we're doing it. When you look at schools and we're saying we need to close schools, but we're not acting on things, those schools we're talking about, we're paying for administration at those schools, we're paying for empty classrooms. They're old buildings that, we're having to pay lights, bills, air conditioning bills. And so some of those decisions that need to be made and implemented rather than talking about them. Some of those are gonna be hard decisions. I think we can get by without administrators and take care of these kids in the classrooms. And some of those hard decisions need to be made until we get to a place that we have a balanced budget.
CJ, same question. What do you think of the administrative restructuring that started already? What do you think of these cuts, and where else can the district reduce expenses to reach a balanced budget?
Yes. As many of you know, we are in the middle of a reorg. I am aware of some information provided to us during executive session. It does directly relate to certain employees, so that is why I can't say with specifics and why it hasn't been published. But yes, there is a plan, the reorg, and it will be published in early August. That was, or is going to be in the superintendent's message tomorrow, that's when it's going to be announced. I believe so, but I can say, without just going into the dollars and pennies, that in the reorg, we are going to be saving roughly a little over $2 million a year in executive salaries alone. So again, my opponent is talking about doing something that I, as sitting trustee, am already a part of doing. So that is something we're doing. Another part of the second part of your question about reducing additional expenses, possibly, like has been discussed, closing and consolidating some campuses is a step, because it could provide some new and state-of-the-art facilities to multiple campuses that are in older buildings. And then overall, the cost savings and something like that can be significant. But I do agree with my opponent that the communication portion of the reorganization, it would be helpful if everyone knew what I knew in terms of some of the information that's been provided to me during executive session. But again, the amount that we're saving per year alone in just executive salaries, over $2 million, I'm really proud of that.
Would you like to add to that? All right. Well, we'll go to closing remarks, and we'll let Kevin have the final closing remarks, so we'll let CJ go first. So CJ, go ahead.
Okay.
Your closing remarks.
Thank you. Well, I'm kind of surprised that there wasn't a question about school safety and security. That was one that I got routinely on the campaign trail. I, in fact, also went down to Austin and gave testimony in front of the House regarding necessary steps and training measures for our campus school resource officers. But I really do appreciate all the questions. I appreciate all the feedback that I've been getting on the campaign trail. I'll stick around and answer any questions if anybody has anything specific. Also on the back, I left some literature. Please pick up some. And thank you again, Chris, for getting this organized.
Sure. Happy to do it. Kevin?
Yeah. Appreciate y'all being here. It's been a process. The ones sitting in the room, I know it's something that you have a vested interest in and care. And I've been someone over the last many months that if you wanted to sit down and talk to me, know where I stand, reached out via email, phone call, we'll continue to do those things. And I think one of the things I've tried to be is who I am and let people know where I stand on issues. And the biggest thing with this is continue to take care of and making sure that kids' interest is the #1 priority in the decisions that are made here. As I mentioned, I'm running to make sure that academic excellence, fiscal responsibility, and stronger communities is paramount. And look forward to having you guys seeing the polls here coming up next week. Thanks.
All right. Thank you again, both candidates. And I just want to really sincerely say that. I mean, it's hard to put yourself out there and do this. And but I don't know too many things more important than serving on school board, honestly. And, so appreciate that, and hope everybody gets out and vote. All the people viewing us at home, we will be viewing the recording. Early voting starts, help me here.
May 30th, Tuesday, May 30th.
Tuesday, May 30th, and of course, election day is June 10th, so get out and vote, and make a difference. This is your chance. So thank you very much. We'll take a 5-minute break and go to the TCC debate runoff.